Yay. I would very much love to welcome everybody to yet another lovely evening together with FestivalYA. And I'm very delighted and honored to be once again the one who will moderate a session with M.L Rio. She's already been a guest of FestivalYA last year when we had a very, very nice, lively, and interactive conversation with her, not only, but mainly about her book, If We Were Villains, translated at the publishing house, Alice Books. Um, this year, we have her again here with us, and we'll talk about If We Were Villains with everybody who didn't get enough last year, everybody who discovered the book in the meanwhile, and everybody who is maybe just curious about it and maybe needed an extra reason to explore it. But we'll also talk about her new book about graveyard shift, soon to be published in Romanian as well at the same publishing house. But also about music and about writing music reviews and about traveling America and traveling the world and about anything else that might pique your curiosity concerning our lovely author here. So before I give her the floor, I would like to mention just a couple of basic rules. So this is going to be like this. I will just voice a couple of questions or general things so that I ensure a lovely warm-up. But in the meanwhile, I would very much love to suggest to you guys to prepare your questions or anything else you would like to share with our author. In this respect, if you want to interact directly with her, I would like to ask you kindly to put a hand up like this, or use your Zoom app to do the same using emoticons. If you don't want or are not prepared or are still thinking about interacting directly with her, kindly write your question, type your question down in the chat, and I will voice it for you. From my perspective, I would love to hear your voices and to have our guests hear your voices as well, but I can perfectly understand if you don't feel like it. So this is one of my roles here tonight to be a messenger for you people. So that's the two basic rules that I'd like us to have in mind. So if you want to speak directly, please raise a hand. If you want to ask or write anything, use the chat for that, and I will voice it for you. That being said, thank you so much for joining us again. How is the weather like in Philadelphia? Because now we have not as good a weather in Europe anymore, unfortunately.
Well, it's we're sort of having the last gasp of summer here. Although it is starting to get a little bit cooler and we're starting to see the leaves change, which is really lovely for me because I'm really not a summer person. I don't like being hot. I much prefer when it's kind of cold and gloomy outside. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if in my case it's something that comes with age, but I've started to be pretty much the same myself in the last years. I mean, maybe 10 years ago, I was all about summer, 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 let it be hot and sunny and everything. But now it's like, oh, no, not anymore. Maybe not rain as I have right now where I am, but at least a bit of gloom, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's this like misconception that people who work in academia take the summer off and it's just this sort of like free for all where you're not working and having a great time. And everyone I've ever known who has actually worked in academia, what happens is during the summer is when you do all of the work that you didn't have time for during the rest of the year. So yeah, summer's never really a vacation when you work in academia.
Yeah, that's pretty true. I think there's a lot of myths and legends speculating about academia. Speaking of which, did anything change compared to last year? Because last year I don't remember exactly if you'd published your thesis already and everything was done, or you were just about to do it.
I think I had maybe like just finished defending my dissertation. I'm not sure if I graduated yet, but I was very much still kind of embroiled in the very end of my PhD program. But I am now out of academia officially, and I am working full time as a writer, which has been a really interesting shift over the last year.
Yeah, maybe you'd like to share a bit about this. I mean, I would be curious to learn more about your new routine, if there is one of the changes that happened in between.
Sure. Um, well, it's definitely, it's another one of those things that I think there is sometimes misconceptions about. People think that when you're a full-time writer, you just like sit around reading and writing and drinking tea all day. And I wish that was the case, but it's really not. I spend so much time just answering emails. There's a lot of admin. There's a lot of reading contracts and phone calls with my agent and my publicist just to kind of make sure that all of the business administration gets done. And being a self-employed artist in the United States is really, really complicated with our tax code and just all of that kind of thing. So it's not nearly as romantic as you might think to kind of be a full-time writer, be a full-time artist. But at the same time, I'm really lucky in that I've got a bunch of different book projects that I'm doing right now. And one of them in particular has had me kind of traveling all over the place. I lived out of my car for about a year on purpose, just traveling around. I think I drove back and forth across the entire United States like 3 times, and I had a broken foot for half of it, so that was exciting. Um, but yeah, it's been really, really great to get to travel so much kind of in the name of research and really live that life while I'm writing a book about it. So that part has been really lovely, but there has also been like a lot of email and a lot of long phone calls with the IRS.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from as a freelance translator. I think I
Yeah.
can pretty much relate. But yeah, I saw that thing about the broken foot. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened there exactly? How long did it take for it to heal? A month or two, I think you were saying.
Oh no, it was so much longer than that.
Oh my.
It was a really bad break. I shattered my calcaneus, which is your heel bone. It's like the hardest bone in your body. I think it was in like 225 pieces, they told me. So I was on crutches for 9 weeks, and then I was in an orthopedic boot for 6 months.
I have no words. I'm very sorry. Are you okay now?
Yeah, I'm okay. It was a crazy year because I had these big research trips planned and I was like, I got to figure out how to do this on one leg now. So at one point, and I was traveling with my dog, which made it even more complicated. So it was like I had both crutches under one arm and I was like dragging my suitcase with the other hand and had the dog leash like wrapped around my body. So it was not my favorite way to travel, but we got through it.
You're absolutely my hero for today and possibly for a very long time. Yeah, I will give this story to any person who comes to me complaining that they have a headache or something like that. Yeah. Good guys, you are becoming more and more in this conversation with us, and I'm super happy to see that we have many, many names popping up on my screen. So I think it would be a good time to start your interactions. If you're ready for that, let me recall it. So show of hands if you want to ask a question or say something directly, or write your thingies in the chat, and I will make sure that they reach our lovely author. Please do not be shy. Let her know whatever you want to learn or tell her about her books, about her life, about Theodora, you have a hand up.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Teodora, and allow me to start by thanking you for writing a book so complex with pristine dark academia vibes, a true masterpiece. As an
Thank you.
aspiring writer myself, you are an inspiration. I told one of my friends after I finished If We Were Villains that it is poetry without rhyme, it is a song without lyrics, and it is life depicted in its own twisty and tragic way. What I loved most about it, though, was the psychological factor. Throughout the story, it was almost impossible to tell the villain from the hero. Therefore, my first question is, do you think that in general, in life, we are all villains at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is very much what If We Were Villains is about, and it's in the title. It's a question of who's the villain and who's the good guy, and can you kind of be both at the same time? And this book is really all about gray areas, not just moral gray areas, although that's a major one, is when is this kind of violence justifiable and what makes it justifiable? Is it justifiable? How do we justify those things? And it's also about gray areas in other respects. These characters are legally adults, but they're still young enough to be making really stupid mistakes. It's kind of the edge of a century. It's all about gray areas in gender and attraction and friendship. So I do think that so often in the media, we have this kind of black and white view of things. It's sort of the superhero dichotomy of you have the good guys and the bad guys, you have the heroes and the villains. And real life just doesn't work that way. It's a lot of shades of gray. It's way more complicated. And of course, there are things that we can just point at that and go, yeah, that's evil and that's bad. But 99% of the time, it's a lot more complex than that. And that was something I really wanted to explore with villains. And I like that you hit on the sort of psychological dimension of it, because there's real agony in asking yourself that question and having to go, am I the bad guy here? That's a really tough question to kind of square with. And I think that all of the characters in the book are doing that at different moments. So it was about that as well. Yeah.
And my second question, thank you for your answer, by the way.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the elite senior student group suffered from the Roman Empire effect? Was their greatness the cause of their downfall?
Definitely. I mean, there is, and it's interesting that we kind of started this conversation talking about misconceptions about academia and about publishing. It's just true that the more pressure you're under to perform, the easier it is to kind of crumble under that pressure. And that certainly happened to me and a lot of my friends during our PhD study. And it's kind of like, as you go on in your education, it gets harder and harder, and it gets more and more difficult to kind of stay on top of those things. So on the one hand, yes, you're achieving something incredible. You've made it to fourth year, you've made it to the doctoral program, but at the same time, that comes with this enormous, enormous pressure, both external and internal, because once you get to a level like that, you're putting pressure on yourself to do better and do more and kind of keep up with your peers. So yeah, absolutely. I think that the further along you get in any field, even though it might look like it's getting easier from the outside, it comes with all of this kind of internal and external pressure that does make it more difficult to keep your head on straight.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Teodora, for breaking the ice and for asking the first question. I already have another hand up, and that's Bianca, please.
Hi, I just wanted to say you're my favorite author, and you have been for quite a few years now. I have read If We Were Villains for about 3 or 4 times. I absolutely adore it. And my question is, when you first wrote the book, did you write a scene that you really liked or loved that didn't end up actually making it into the last draft?
Yeah, that's a great question. Also, I just have to say, like, I love your David Bowie t-shirt. I see that we both
I
came.
love yours too.
That we both came representing the Thin White Duke here. Yeah, absolutely. I think the draft of villains that we submitted was something like 117,000 words, and the final draft was like 110. So we ended up cutting and moving a lot of stuff around. Although what you have to remember is I wrote this book like 10 years ago. Because a funny thing happened with Villains where when it first came out, like no one really read it. It took a couple of years for Villains to kind of find its people. So it's actually been a really long time since I was writing this book. And it's actually tough for me to remember what was in the first drafts that didn't make it into the final draft. But there was a scene when Oliver takes that trip to New York to hang out with Meredith. There was a scene that was sort of a morning after scene with Oliver and Caleb making very awkward small talk with each other. And it was very funny, but it didn't actually add anything to the plot. And my editor finally went, I think we have to cut that because we need the words more than we need that conversation. So a little part of me is kind of mourning that that got left on the cutting room floor. But part of writing is you have to make tough choices like that. So that's one from the vaults.
Thank you. Also, what's your favorite Bowie album?
Oh gosh. It really I've had different favorites at like every point in my life because my dad introduced me to David Bowie when I was like 8. I will say Station to Station is always one of my favorites, but the one that I would really recommend as kind of a deep cut is Lodger. Lodger is just a terrific album.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much, guys, for having divided the conversation towards music as well. This is a great opportunity for me to mention that Mel is very much into music too, and she's a pro. So if you feel like asking her more stuff about music, I don't mind at all. In the meanwhile, we have a question from Hachi in the chat, and I'm going to read it right now. She says, I'm very grateful to be here tonight, and it's a pleasure to meet you. I have a question about if we were villains. The characters in your novel are deeply influenced by the roles they play in Shakespeare's works. How did you decide which Shakespearean characters to align with each of your protagonists? Was it something that came naturally, or did you have specific Shakespearean characters for your characters?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really how I came up with the group of characters that you meet in this novel is I had been a Shakespearean actor. I was a Shakespearean actor for something like 15 years. And when I started working on this book, I sort of said to myself, if you were to walk into a room where a group of Shakespearean actors were rehearsing, who are the people that you would find in that room? Like, what are the character types that you need to do these plays? Because most of early modern theater was cast with a kind of typecasting because early modern theater worked very differently from how we do theater now. Instead of like you play one role every night for 3 weeks, you do 6 weeks of table work, and then you launch the show. How theater worked in Shakespeare's day was you might do 6 different plays in a week. And so each actor in the company had sort of a set roster of characters that they played. So you had an actor who played all of the leads, you had teenage boys who played all the women, you had clown characters who always played that clown character. And we don't do that so much anymore, but that was sort of where I started with kind of thinking about the personality types that you would find in this room. But after the kind of first little bits of casting happen, everything shifts and the dynamic changes. So all of that typecasting starts to change as well. So, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the book, but not all 7 of them make it through the entire book. And when you suddenly shift from having a cast of 7 to having a cast of 6, you have a hole in that group that you need to fill. So all of those people end up getting shuffled around and they start playing different roles and kind of stepping out of their comfort zones. And that was deliberate as well, because I was interested in this idea of you can't typecast people in real life. As an actor, you're sort of trained to say, like, this is who I am and these are the roles that I play. It's actually part of the reason I'm not an actor anymore is I didn't have a really clear-cut type, so it was hard for me to get cast in things. But Meredith in particular kind of pushes back against that. She's like, just because I'm cast this way doesn't mean that that is who I am. So that goes back to that idea about gray areas is just because you're playing this type of person on stage and you were good at projecting that sort of personality doesn't mean that's actually who you are on the inside. So it's a very astute question because the book is really all about those negotiations of identity. And how much of it is nature, how much of it is nurture, when you have all these people telling you, no, you're the femme fatale, that's the role that you play, how much of that starts to bleed over into your real life? Because I've certainly seen that happen with other creatives that I work with. Yeah, of course.
Thank you,
you.
Maria. Thank you. That was actually quite an interesting question and a very nice answer. And what I really loved about it is that you gave us so many details about what used to be done in theater back in the days and how is it going now. Because sometimes I ask myself, like, didn't we have enough of, Shakespeare discussions and Shakespeare scholars, and will they ever get tired of this subject? Because, but every now and then you guys come up with something new and something like a different sort of, point of view or something else, and you dig something up and then like, okay, fine, let's take this one as well. Like, I don't know, did you ever feel like you were somehow redundant or anything in your research?
Yeah, that's a big struggle for a lot of people who do Shakespeare studies. Is there is in the academy this emphasis on what's your intervention. You'll hear people on your committee say all the time, what's your intervention? And what that means is, what are you contributing to the field that's new, that no one's ever said before? And when you're talking about a field of literary scholarship that's existed for 250 years. Shakespeare was around for longer than that, but nobody took a real academic interest in Shakespeare until about 200 years after his death. So we've been studying these texts to death for literally centuries. It's really hard to come up with a new thing to say. And what that has resulted in is all like this explosion of really niche subfields in Shakespeare. So under the kind of umbrella of Shakespeare studies, you have people who do performance practice, where all they study is how are these plays actually performed in the 1500s. And believe it or not, stuff like that, like really minute information about like how much candles cost, can tell us a lot about how a show might have been lit in the Wanamaker Playhouse and like or in the Blackfriars, which the Wanamaker is based on. And that really changes the way that you read the text. For me, just as an example from my own research, I work in the medical humanities. So my research is a combination of medical history, like the history of science and medicine, and literary history. So what I look at is how contemporary ideas about medicine and particularly mental health show up in the literature of the period. So I'm reading these plays kind of in tandem with doctors' notebooks from the 17th century and that sort of thing. And once you start to understand, like, oh, this is what the early modern concept of trauma theory looked like, it can completely change the way you read a play. Like after doing my dissertation, I will never read Macbeth the same way again. And so at the same time that there is this risk of redundancy, because we're kind of stumbling on new historical information all the time, it changes the way we read the plays. So that's one thing that really never gets old about this field. It's you kind of never know what new little historical tidbit is going to change the way we read these texts that we think we know so well, which is part of what makes it such a delightful field to be in.
Yeah, now that you are presenting it this way, yeah, it does have a certain appeal to it.
Yeah.
A bit more appeal. Yeah. Actually, it's quite exciting. Yeah. Okay. I will admit it. Fine.
Yeah.
Fine. You win. You win.
It's a bit like it feels like a literary treasure hunt. Like you're kind of on the hunt for something no one's ever discovered before about these plays. And that's really delightful when you can kind of frame it that way for yourself.
Especially if, as you said, like this topic of mental health, especially if it turns out to be somehow relevant, even unexpectedly. So yeah, that's amazing. I will go back to the questions now. I'm also trying to put them in a certain succession so that they make sense with what we've been talking about. So I will skip now to a question related to if we were villains, and then I'll go back to the other ones.
Sure.
So this is a question from Instagram. I'm a very big fan of your book, but sadly I didn't yet get to your novella yet. Anyway, do you prefer James and Oliver or Meredith and Oliver. Personally, I cannot choose.
Well, I didn't choose, you'll notice if you read the book. And that's another place in which I think that this book is very much about gray areas. And there's a question of, can you love two people equally at the same time? Personally, I think the answer is yes. And I think that Oliver is kind of in the middle of working out that negotiation. I heard somebody describe this book once as not having a love triangle, but as having an unholy love pentagram. And I was like, yeah, you're not wrong. Like, you're not wrong. But when you work this closely with this many people on such kind of big emotional things, I think it's difficult to delineate, I think it's sometimes difficult to delineate romantic feelings from friendly ones in this kind of an environment where the emotions are so intense and you're being kind of puppeteered by someone like Gwendolyn. So I think the fact that you can't choose, I think that's kind of deliberate, and I think that's embedded in the text, and it's the same dilemma that Oliver has. And the question that I think the end kind of leaves you with is will he choose, and does he have to?
This, I do hope that our follower is satisfied with your answer. I see another hand up at the moment. In the meantime, I will rearrange the questions in the chat. So, Ioana, please go on.
Hello. First of all, I wanted to say that If You Are Villains is such a huge comfort for me as a theater kid, and I just found a home in it. And I wanted to say that basically If You Were Villains is all about Shakespeare, and in Weekend at Bertie's, there's a lot of Edgar Allan Poe references. And I wanted to know if The Graveyard Shift has any of these literary references.
Yeah, well, so Graveyard is a little less literary in that it's not kind of focused on one writer the way that Villains is and the way that Weekend at Bernie's is. Instead, a Graveyard Shift kind of sprang from some different interests of mine, but you will still see a lot of like little echoes of my research in there. There's a lot of stuff about ergotism and medieval epidemics, which are like another branch of my research. I am a literary scholar, but I also study the history of science. So a lot of that kind of made its way into Graveyard Shift. It's less interested in literature than it is in a lot of the other themes that we've talked about here, because it's interested in mental health. It's interested in these kind of spongy relationships between people and these kind of interesting group dynamics. It is set on a college campus, so there is an element of academia kind of in the background, but it's less about literary investigation than it is about all the kind of different elements of what university culture can be. Because I think something that I find interesting about this subgenre, dark academia, and what you have to remember is, again, I wrote Villains 10 years ago when dark academia was not a thing. We didn't call it that. It didn't exist. You couldn't buy a dark academia themed candle on Instagram. There is this kind of idealization of the academy in this subgenre, and it kind of creates this false notion of like every college in the world is this kind of like small elite liberal arts college where everyone is just like, again, reading books and drinking tea. And I wanted to kind of look at a different sort of university, because that's actually not the sort of university I went to. I went to a big R1 research university that had this massive medical school, and the main focuses on that campus were medicine and basketball. And that was not what I was into. And I did feel a little bit like a fish out of water. But because what I do now is this combination of literature and science, that was something I wanted to explore a little bit more with Graveyard Shift. So Graveyard Shift is kind of about some of the tensions between the humanities and the sciences on campus and how that plays out in the larger community. So less direct interest in literature, but definitely some investigative journalism happening and some interesting, tricky, moral, humanitarian questions about research ethics.
Thank you. And I also wanted to ask if there's one Shakespeare play that you have a really close connection with.
Oh, God. So many more than one. Like, you spend 7 years writing a dissertation on Shakespeare, and you will, like, I can recite most of Macbeth by heart. Like, I could probably do a one-woman version of that play pretty much unprompted, because I've worked on it so much. I'm partial to the tragedies because I just think they're more fun than the comedies, but the plays I work on the most closely are definitely Macbeth, and King Lear. I have also done a lot with Twelfth Night, which was the first Shakespeare that I was actually in, so it will always have a special place in my heart. But Two Noble Kinsmen is another one that I've worked on a lot recently. And Two Noble Kinsmen is one of those plays that no one ever reads, which is such a shame because it's really fun. Yeah, and the other one, I guess, is the Henry VI cycle, which is cheating a little bit because it's 3 plays, not 1. And it's really, really early in Shakespeare's career, the Henry VI plays, and no one ever performs them, which is kind of a shame. So if you really want to go into like a dark horse history, the H6 cycle is a good time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
You do realize that actually we're inspiring a bunch of people to sort of go into academia.
Oh God, I don't know if that's a good thing.
Now. I know. I was just thinking, I mean, is it a good or a bad thing? But yeah, I just wanted to, you know, give you a heads up, maybe. Yeah.
I feel like I have to do some disclaimers. Like, please don't go into academia thinking it's going to be like one of these books, because it's not. It's really not. Like, all of my friends from my PhD cohort, they now call me Dr. Don't Do It. The joke is that I spent 7 years getting a PhD so I could spend the rest of my life telling people not to get a PhD. Like, truly don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth your mental health. It's not worth your physical health. You can get a library card and study books on your own time without selling your soul to the academy. That is what I would recommend. If you ever need someone to talk you out of going to graduate school, I have 6,000 reasons, and I will do that as a public service. So that's the disclaimer: is do not let dark academia trick you into thinking that grad school is a good idea, because it's not. That's my spiel. Sorry, I'm done now.
Yeah, I would definitely take your advice on that. So yeah, thank you. Good. We stepped a bit into the realm of graveyard shift. So Adina, I do hope that you've listened to Mel now, and you've heard her answer, because Adina also asked you about the new novella. And I will get to okay. We have another question from Instagram. I don't know what characters they refer to, but let's take all of them maybe. So the question goes like, who was your favorite character while writing?
You know, that's like asking somebody to pick their favorite child. I can truly say that I didn't really have a favorite character. They all fascinate me at different moments in the text. And I think they're all kind of more or less sympathetic at different moments in the text. And this is just part and parcel of the way that I write. I really like group stories. I like true ensemble narratives. I get bored with books where there's kind of like one main character and that's the person that you stick with the whole time, because I don't want to be stuck with any one person all the time, even if it's me, like especially if it's me. So I didn't really have favorites. I will say, just in terms of like sheer fun for the writing, Alexander was probably the most fun to write. He did get all the best lines. So I guess I'll give you that one.
Thank you for this. And we go on with If We Were Villains. From Maria. First of all, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for writing such a complex and gripping novel. My question is, did you know from the start how you wanted the book to end, or did you figure it out as you were writing it?
Nope, I knew from the beginning what the end was going to look like. And that's really mostly just that my writing process is a little bit weird. And maybe this has something to do with the way graduate school has broken my brain, but I don't write anything without like a very thorough outline. So my writing process kind of looks like I'll get a little germ of an idea, and then I'll spend something like 6 months just kicking it around, playing with who are these characters, like what are the themes that I'm looking to explore here? How would I put that together in kind of a coherent narrative? And with Villains, I was very invested in kind of mimicking the structure of a Shakespearean tragedy. So that was my starting point. Was I looked at these kind of 4 main plays that I really wanted to explore in the text, and what are the sort of like common arcs there? Like, how does that 5-act structure move? So I figured all that out before I even started writing, page 1. And the ending that it has, that was always the ending, and it was the only ending that felt right and the only ending that felt justified by the rest of the narrative. And that again kind of goes back to that it's all about gray areas. It's all about things that are not certain and not easy to parse out. So yeah, the ending was one thing that never changed.
Could you tell me if there was a very big difference between your writing process of If We Were Villains and Graveyard Shift, since you keep mentioning that there's been a while since you wrote the first one?
Yeah, Graveyard Shift, the way I wrote Graveyard Shift is not the way I've written anything else in my life, because the way it came around was a little bit strange. Pretty much the minute I finished my PhD, because I'd been so stuck in my dissertation that it was really impossible to like write fiction at the same time. So pretty much the instant I finished my PhD, my agent was like, "Where is the next book? Let's go." So I was actually already writing my next novel, which is called Hot Wax, which is coming out in 2025. And I'd actually already written a version of that like 6 years ago that I was rewriting from the top down. And I was about 3 months deep into that when my publisher for Villains reached out and they said, Barnes and Noble is really interested in doing a novella. Villains has been selling really well for them. Would you be interested? And do you have an idea for that? And because I knew that my readers had been waiting so long for another book and it was going to be a while still before Hot Wax, before anything happened with Hot Wax, I went, oh yeah, that would maybe be a really nice way to get something else out in the world. But it did mean that we had to do it on this insanely compressed timeline, because I think they called me about that in June of 2023. And I was already in the middle of writing Hot Wax, and we had like a November sub date that I needed to get it done for. So I basically continued writing Hot Wax while I was in that exploratory phase for Graveyard Shift. So I was writing Hot Wax and kind of thinking about Graveyard Shift and figuring out what the plot might look like at the same time. And then pretty much the instant I turned Hot Wax in on sub, like we sent it off to editors and my agent said, okay, you've got a couple of weeks. Turned out that it actually wasn't a couple of weeks. But she said, okay, now we got to get the first draft of Graveyard Shift ready to go. Originally, they told me it was due in February. And then they said, just kidding, can we have it by December 15th? So I actually wrote the first draft of Graveyard Shift in like 2.5 weeks. After this like couple of like maybe like 2 months of planning and outlining, nice. Which was insane after I'd just, spent the last most of the year like living out of my car with a shattered foot and writing another book. And then I basically landed and was like, okay, I guess I have to turn around and write this book in 3 weeks now. So I did. Fortunately, it's a short book, so that worked out okay. And then unfortunately, I wrote it in this kind of like weird 2-week fever dream at like 2 o'clock in the morning most nights. And unfortunately, my agent and my editor both loved it and came back and said, we want just a little bit more of these two characters. So we added a couple of scenes. Yeah. And then we went to production pretty much. I think we only did 1 copy edit because we were on such a short timeline with that. So definitely not my favorite way to write a book, but we did it. Yeah.
Did you have the topic already lurking somewhere, or what's the story?
Yeah, I have what I call the story drawer, which is just like a file of ideas that I've had for like, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a podcast. I'm not a podcaster, but like maybe it's a book, maybe it's a mini series, maybe it's a graphic novel. I don't know. And I had this idea for Graveyard Shift that I'd been kicking around for a really long time, but I didn't want to turn it into a whole novel. It didn't feel like it was big enough for that, because mostly what I liked about it was I had this idea of I really wanted to write a story that took place in one night. So Graveyard Shift, like I wrote it in 2 weeks, but the whole story takes place in the course of like, I think it's like 9 hours or something. Just because I really wanted to try that. I really like playing with form and structure, and that seemed like an interesting kind of challenge to set for myself. And so it turned into this kind of interesting relay where each character kind of hands the narrative off to the next character at the end of their chapter, and then it circulates through the group like that. So it was really a lot of fun to write. And it's also just, you know, you write different books in different ways. Villains, like I hadn't been published, I didn't have an agent, nobody was looking over my shoulder. So it was really, I was kind of free to take as much time with that as I wanted. Graveyard Shift was very different. I had a bunch of people who were like, we need this yesterday. And just knowing that, I kind of didn't want to bite off more than I could chew or more than the book could kind of contain, because my publisher said, you know, this can only be 130 pages, like this can only be 30,000 words. So I had to come up with a story that was going to be satisfying, but could still fit in that container. So I wasn't trying to write a big grand tragedy like I did for If We Were Villains. It was much more supposed to be kind of campy and fun and entertaining, but something that you could kind of eat like a snack.
I was just thinking about this. I mean, coming from what you just said, do you think that there is a certain switch towards shorter stories, perhaps? I don't know if this is a thing yet, but somehow I keep sensing that there's maybe more and more books coming out that are somehow shorter, but somehow as full of meaning as they used to be, but in less pages. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, so this is actually a phenomenon happening in publishing that we do have some data on and we do have some reasons for. So I just went on sub for the first time, which means submitting a new novel to new editors, trying to get someone to buy your book is all that means. Going on sub with Hot Wax was really interesting because when I was pitching villains like 10 years ago, everybody said, you know, a novel is about 100,000 words. Everyone said a novel is about 100,000 words. And now that's really shifted, and nobody wants to see a novel that's 100,000 words. Everybody wants a novel that's 80,000 words. We like books that are shorter. And novellas are actually doing really well in the marketplace, which historically has not been the case. Like, it's been really hard to sell novellas in the past. As for why that is, there's a couple of different reasons. The one that everybody likes to point their fingers at and blame is like, oh, it's TikTok, it's social media, everybody's attention span is shrinking to zero. And, you know, that may be true broadly, like kind of in the mainstream. I don't think that's true for kind of the reading population. I do think social media has had an interesting effect on the industry where it has created, you know, we talked about in Shakespeare studies how there are all these niche subfields. The same thing is happening in publishing, where we get all these like really, really niche subgenres. And that includes form, that includes novellas. There are people who really like novellas and are looking for that. And publishers are learning that more variety is better in a marketplace where being really niche is actually a good thing. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it, and this is the really ugly practical part of it, is supply chain issues. Paper is expensive and publishing has not entirely recovered from COVID. So books that are cheaper and easier to print are also easier to sell. So it's an interesting mix of kind of like artistic, cultural, and practical considerations. But I think we absolutely are seeing a shift towards, not a shift towards, but basically more room in the marketplace for shorter books.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For me, I used to joke that as a translator, I'm very happy that shorter books seem to be now a thing, because for me, it's like not necessarily less work, because sometimes it's even more difficult to translate something that's like more condensed and it can take a while to actually figure it out. But at least, you know, when you see something that's 100 something pages, you're like, oh, I can actually do this in a normal amount of time, as opposed to, you know, when you see like a brick of a book and you're like, oh, it sounds exciting, but
so a doorstop, as we call it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we have another question from you, coming from Irina this time. Are there any symbolic motifs or recurring imagery in Graveyard Shift that might not be immediately obvious, but are key to understanding the deeper layers of the story?
Yes. This was one thing that was really, really fun about Graveyard Shift, was because it was so short, finding places to kind of bury all these little Easter eggs and sort of make it feel fully fleshed out, even though it was a real tight story. For me, the biggest thing is, the graveyard itself is kind of the reason, the raison d'etre for the whole book. And it is sort of based on a cemetery where I used to hang out in college, because that was a thing that I did. But the church, there's this old kind of crumbling church in the cemetery called the Church of St. Anthony the Anchorite. And there is this crazy mural behind the altar that I got to sort of just like design in my head, which was a lot of fun. And I would say that that mural is probably the most like symbolically significant thing in the story. There's a lot of little hints and clues kind of buried in there. And that's also where I got to kind of dust off some of my like weird historical knowledge and put that to good use. So yeah, I would say like when you get to the description of the mural, like if there's stuff that you're not familiar with, like look it up, like look up Hieronymus Bosch. If you don't know who Bosch is, that's going to be a real good time. Yeah, so I hope that that'll be a kind of a rich little Easter egg hunt.
Now you have my attention. So yeah, okay, back to this. So I have a question from Amalia. She says, I read If We Were Villains last year and really enjoyed it. For my part, I am passionate about writing and I would like to know, how do you handle writer's block or moments of creative doubt?
Good questions, big questions. I'll take those like one at a time. As far as writer's block goes, there are two things for me that help with writer's block. The first one is get up and walk away from it. Like get up and walk away from it when you've been banging against your head, like banging your head against the keyboard for so long. And sometimes if you're on a deadline, you don't really have the luxury of doing this. But for me, the biggest thing that helps with when I'm feeling stuck about something is walk away from it. And I mean, literally walk away from it. What I usually do when I'm stuck in the middle of a scene, in the middle of an outline, whatever it is, I will put my headphones on, put my leash on my dog, and go and just walk for however long it takes. And usually just kind of getting away from the keyboard where I'm not actually looking at it, and I can just sort of let my brain off the leash to kind of run after those questions. Usually I will come up with some kind of a solution very, very quickly once I'm like out moving. If it's a bigger, like I really don't know what to do with this book at this point, and then I will actually try and take like fully a week or two away from it and just get some temporal distance, because I find that you can get real tunnel vision when you're kind of too close to something, and taking a break from it often just is like a reset on your perspective, and you can come back and be like, I see why this isn't working now, and I understand exactly what I have to do. But part of that is when you walk away from it, you can't just walk away from it and then keep thinking about it the whole time you've walked away from it. So what I usually do is I try to engage with other forms of art that are not my art. That's when I will go to a concert or go to a museum or just put my headphones on and listen to an entire record, just to get into somebody else's kind of creative headspace for a bit as sort of a palate cleanser. Because the other thing is, I think we can get so wrapped up in our own work that we forget that an important part of writing is reading and experiencing other art. Because if you're creating art in a vacuum, it's not going to be very good. So those are kind of my two remedies for writer's block, are like walk away from it, like literally walk away from it. I'm also, driving is a big flow state for me. And because the US is a big country, I can do this here. I can get in my car and just go for long, aimless drives, which is a way that my brain also tends to work through plot problems. Yeah, and then music, movies, books, museums, dance, whatever kind of fires you creatively, just like going to seek out like little bits of inspiration is always helpful. And as for creative doubt, make peace with it, make friends with it, because it's going to be part of your entire creative life. Like, even when you get to a place where you're having a little more creative success, and when you see people who seem like they're having a lot of creative success, it's good to remember that there's still a lot of failure that's part of that, and those two things are not mutually exclusive. Like, we finally sold Hot Wax to an editor I'm really excited to work with, and we've had such a blast turning it into a much better book than it was before he bought it. And we had 5 editors who rejected it, 5 editors who were like, no, I don't think so. Like, we don't want this. It's not what we're looking for. And I've worked on this book now for something like 7 years. I've had 4 or 5 novels die on sub that nobody wanted to buy and will never see the light of day. And that's just part of the business. Like, it's such a competitive field to be in that just because it's not going the way you dreamed or the way you wanted to doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It's just a tough business. So it's creative doubt is just, it's part of it, and it's something you can't beat yourself up for. And in some ways it's actually kind of healthy to have some creative doubt, because if you don't have any creative doubt, it means that you think everything you're doing is perfect, and you're probably not a very good writer, because being able to be critical of your own work is also key to being a good creator. So if you're having some doubt and some imposter syndrome, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's your brain's way of saying, I don't feel like this is as good as it can be yet. And that's a good instinct to have. So yeah, I think make peace with your creative doubt and make friends with your creative doubt, because it's not a thing that's going to go away.
I do believe that it's super important that you're sharing these things with us. I always appreciate when authors are very honest and somehow say that, look, there have been failures, or I don't know, miss anything in my career as a writer, because sometimes I think the public and the readers are so, fueled up by the thing that, oh, they're so successful, they must, like, anything they write gets published, and of course they have this and that. And maybe for aspiring or budding writers, it can be such a disappointment when they keep being rejected, or they don't feel like finishing something because they are afraid to be rejected. So I think it's super important that we get the chance to listen to you sharing that. Might have had your moments in which something you wrote wasn't there at the right moment, or at the right time.
Will you say that again? I'm sorry, my Zoom froze for a second.
Yeah, no worries. I just ended the thing with saying that it's super nice that you can be candid about this, and about, having your own moments in which what you wrote wasn't what was supposed to be, or what it was meant to be at the right moment.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if it helps put things in perspective, Villains did not succeed when it first came out. When Villains first came out, it was not a flop, but when Villains came out, it didn't get a whole lot of support from the publisher for a bunch of reasons that had nothing to do with me. And that's just the way publishing works. Like, schedules change, publishers' priorities shift. Like, my paperback came out the same day as James Comey's paperback. Nobody was going to pay attention to that. There's a lot that's just beyond your own control. And for years after Villains was published, I could not get anything else published because the sales numbers just weren't there. And we tried to sell 5 novels that editors were like, we like this, but her first book isn't selling, so we're not going to buy it. And it took until 3 or 4 years after the book came out for it to really find its people. And I don't mind telling you guys, I spent 3 or 4 years like really kind of hating the book, because I thought it had ruined my career. I thought I was never going to get published again. And I was in a pretty dark place about it. And that did such a dramatic 180 that I never could have predicted. And publishing art life is just like that. Like, you never know. So you can't kind of hang your whole soul on one creative project, because you're going to do stuff that you love, that you're excited about, that never quite makes it. And that's just part of it. And every now and then you get lucky and you get vindicated, and something comes around and somebody does love your book. And then 10 years later, you get to publish another one, but there are no guarantees. And yeah, doesn't mean it wasn't a good book, because that's what I thought. I was like, oh, this book must not be selling because it's just a terrible book and people hate it. And years later, that does not seem to be the case. So it's always worth taking your own creative doubt with a grain of salt as well.
We got a question from Lucia in the same vein. She's asking you if you were thinking about quitting writing altogether.
I mean, I thought I was going to have to, because nobody wanted to publish anything I had written after that. And that was when I kind of pivoted to academia and said, okay, well, I took my shot and I missed, and it doesn't seem like I'm ever going to get published again. So I guess I'm going to pivot to plan B, which was going kind of full time into the academy. And then COVID happened and the academy collapsed and my plan B went out the window. So I had to kind of pivot back to plan A. But yeah, there were a number of years there where I was depressed and humiliated and just didn't even want to think about it. And then I didn't tell people I was a writer. I didn't tell people I had a book out because it just felt embarrassing, truly. And it shouldn't have, because, I was 22 years old when I wrote that book. And in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, okay. Is there a lot of stuff I would change? Yes. But I'm proud of my 22-year-old self for shooting for the moon, even if she didn't really know what she was doing. So yeah, it's been a very strange journey that Villains has been on, and very abnormal. This doesn't happen for a lot of books. So I do consider myself very fortunate that Villains sort of got rescued from obscurity.
It does have to seem, it does seem to have a very agitated history somehow. And it's very nice that we keep talking about it and it keeps being relevant,
Yeah.
as you might notice, because you just said it took a while for it to get its people and to be loved. And now look at it. It's still doing great, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to remind everyone that we have maybe 5, let's say top 10 minutes in the company of the lovely M.L Rio. So if you can gather your courage, if you liked it so far, or if you feel more inspired now, it's a very good moment to ask her your final questions or to give her any sort of feedback. Ioana, please.
I had a couple more questions.
Yeah.
The first one, when it comes to being approached by an editor, how do you come to terms with the fact that your writing is going to be changed with the help of someone else?
Well, so first of all, editors don't usually approach authors. You approach the editor, is how that works. And it's usually your agent will come to you with a short list of editors and say, I think these people might be a good fit for this book. And then you go into edit calls, and edit calls are interesting. And edit calls used to just be phone calls, and now they're Zoom calls because everything has to be a Zoom. But in those edit calls, it's a weird thing that's kind of like halfway between like a job interview and a first date, because you as the author are asking the editor, like, how do you imagine this changing? What do you want to be different? How do you imagine selling it? Like, who do you think the audience for this is? And at the same time, the editor is asking you, would you be willing to make these changes? Can we make this theme a little bit bigger? And then if it seems like your visions are kind of aligned, the editor will make an offer on the book. It's not quite that simple, because the editor can't just offer on a book. They have to get approval of the publisher. They have to do a P&L statement. It's very complicated. So sometimes editors want to buy books and they can't. But basically, you and your agent, if you get an offer, have to decide, do we think that our visions align with this editor? And if you do, then you sign a contract and you start working on it. You go into what's called developmental edits, where usually your editor will read through the whole book and send you an edit letter where they say, here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses. And every editor is different in how they work. I've been lucky, or not necessarily lucky, just the style of editing that works best for me is, my editors have always said, here's what's not working for me, find your own way to fix it. And I like that, because it's, it still feels like mine. It still feels like I get to do the kind of creative part of it. But I'm also, I think, a little bit unusual in that I really love working with an editor, and I'm like, please God, take this and make it better. Like, every editor that I've worked with has dramatically improved my work, and I am very grateful for that intervention, because when you're too close to it, it's hard to experience it the way a reader does. And there are things that an editor is going to notice that you would never see on your own. The other thing to remember is that an editor is literally a professional reader. Like, that's what they do. They're professional readers. They are smart people whose entire job is to make a book something that someone in the audience would want to read. So a lot of it has to do with mindset. And I do know that many, many authors really hate this. They hate doing revisions. They take it personally. I have a friend who said to me recently, she was like, oh, my editor knows that as soon as she sends me an edit letter, she can't talk to me for 48 hours because I have to just be mad about it for 2 days. And that's fine. That's totally legit. Some people are like very protective of their work that way. I'm not. I'm all about like, yes, give me all of your ideas. Let's tear this thing down and rebuild it, and it will be so much better. And that may come from the fact that I have also worked as an editor. I've worked as a freelance editor. I'm the associate editor for 2 academic journals. So that's a skill set that I have and a skill set that I appreciate. And so I've always been really grateful and eager to work with editors, but it's just important to make sure that you and your editor are on the same page about the book and what it is, what's the point of it. And that's why you want to be careful in those edit calls about asking those questions of where do you see this going? How do you see it changing? Who do you imagine marketing this to? And, you know, publishing is complicated. And unfortunately, you have to be able to take criticism and you have to be able to revise your work or no one will want to work with you. And it's just such a competitive business that you can't afford to be precious about it. So yeah, I encourage people to think of the editorial process as the process of finding the best possible version of the book and, you know, kind of taking that lump of coal and turning it into a diamond. So personally, I don't have an issue with that. I love the revision process. It's actually my favorite part of the process. So if you can cultivate that kind of an attitude about it, it will do you good in the long run.
Thank you. And I cannot leave without knowing who you played in 12th Night.
Oh, I was Feste. I was the clown, and I was 14. I played Feste, and there's a whole speech from that play that I can still do because it's kind of a tongue twister, and I was so terrified I was going to get it wrong that I could still pull that out of my brain literally 20 years later. It's if that this simple syllogism will serve, so if not, what remedy? As there is no true cuckold but calamity, so beauty is a flower. The lady bade take away the fool. Therefore, I say again, take her away. So that stuff lives in my brain rent free.
Fest is also my favorite. So that's thank you so much.
I had a great time with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your questions. Thank you, Mel, for the performance. That was lovely. I do suggest that maybe we can end the trail of questions with Lucia's in the chat. So she's asking if you will have a European tour for Graveyard Shift.
So we do. We have a limited European tour for Graveyard. There's always a possibility that I'll be back in Europe because I'm traveling for book support a lot more now than I used to, partly because I'm no longer indentured to the Academy. So let's see. I'm looking at my wall calendar. My first event is in Spain. I have an event in Spain on October 30th. Then I go to Edinburgh. I have 4 dates in the UK, and then I'm in France for a couple of weeks. That's all we have so far. And I have to say, it's not a lack of desire to go more places, but how these book tours work is the author has very little say in it. It's where you get offers from bookstores that want to host you and where your publisher thinks it's worth sending you to. The only reason I'm even able to do so many dates in the US is because I volunteered to drive myself. So I'm going to drive something like 15,000 miles starting on September 24th, and then do 2 weeks in Europe in the middle. So yeah, I would love to do more of Europe, and I hope that down the line that'll be an option. But if you can make it to Spain or the UK or France, I'd love to see you.
Me too. That was the whole idea. Will you be in London too?
Yes, I think our UK dates it's November 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're doing Edinburgh, Leeds, London, and Bath.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Hopefully we'll see you there.
Yeah, that would be great.
Or perhaps in Romania one day. Why not?
Yes, I spent some time in Romania when I was like, I don't know, like 18. And I really loved it there, and I would really like to come back sometime because it was a great trip, and I had so much fun exploring so many old castles and just fascinating bits of history. Also, fantastic graveyards. You guys have wonderful graveyards in Romania.
That's what I wanted to say.
So many
it's
good
probably
ones.
going to be a big inspiration for you.
Yeah, there's one in particular that I keep thinking of. I've been to Vlad the Impaler's grave. That was fun. I had to like pay a little guy in a rowboat to take me out to the island, which was very cool. I think was it Sigishwara? I'm trying to remember. There's this beautiful, beautiful cemetery that's up on a hill. I might be misremembering the city, but I actually thought about that a lot as I was working on Graveyard Shift. So yes, you guys have real quality cemeteries.
Could I ask, in what city in Spain will you be touring?
Madrid.
Okay, thank
I'll
you.
be in Madrid,
I'll
and
try to get there.
Yeah, it would be great to see you. I will only be there for 48 hours. I will probably be very jet lagged, but I would love to see you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that a couple of information about where will Mel be in the next months can already be found on her Instagram account. Because I was just checking the dates from UK as well, because I was moaning a couple of weeks ago there in the comments that, oh my God, I'm going to miss you, because I will be in the UK for YLC. I'm going to be there a week and a half before, but I'll see. Maybe I'll work something out. If Lucia can do it, maybe we can pull something out as well.
Yeah, that would be fabulous.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah. I'm also thinking about this. But what I wanted to say is that will that be a possibility? Yeah, so we now have a link in the chat, which is just great, and I'm gonna access it right now so that I don't miss it. But it's like more of a practical questions, like sometimes we have these tour dates announced with very, very short time before they actually happen. So is there a reason for this?
Basically the reason is that planning a book tour is like herding cats. I have been trying to get this finalized. This is not an exaggeration. I've been trying to get this finalized for like 3 months, and it's just complicated because it's a combination of, because with a tour like this, it's not just one publisher working with a bunch of different bookstores. It's actually 4 different publishers who are involved in planning this thing, because it's my US publisher, it's my Spanish publisher, it's my UK publisher, and then it's also my French publisher. So trying to make all of those dates work around each other with also the bookstores, like when they can make it work, because they're hosting all kinds of events, not just me. And also, you know, for the US leg of the tour, it's where can I drive and how much time? Like, I think I have one day where I have to drive like 15 hours from Mississippi to Columbus, Ohio, because my publisher did that to me. But yeah, it's one of those things that just, it's even more frustrating for the author than for anyone else, because I'm like, I'm trying to promote these things and I want people to come, and if they only have a week's notice, that's going to be hard. But really it's a lot of logistics, and it's very tricky to get that stuff nailed down. So that's really all it is. And tours are one of those things that tours are kind of like cover art, in that the author has so much less control than you think they do. The author has so much less control than you think they do. It's basically like your publicity team at the various publishers, your independent publicist, if you have one, they will come to you and be like, here's our plan, yes or no. And that's about as much input as you get. So I you know, and then people on Instagram are always like, come to Brazil. And I'm like, I would love to, but I can't until somebody wants to fly me there. So yeah, hoping to be in Europe more in the coming years though.
Yeah, that would definitely be fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing this events part of your website, which I am ashamed to admit, but I haven't seen it before. So now it's pinpointed on my laptop, so I will keep checking it. And also, this is for everyone. Mel is quite active on Instagram, if you haven't noticed. So you can always follow her there and maybe find out some new stuff about what her plans are.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. You can also find me on Substack if you want to kind of get like a look into the writing process. I write about that a lot on Substack. So that's kind of my regular newsletter. I can drop a link to that too, if that would be helpful. Where you'll see a lot of stuff about Graveyard Shift behind the scenes, and a lot of stuff about Hot Wax coming up. So that's really the best place to keep up with everything. And I will put that in the chat as well.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, I had subscribed a while ago, but that's quite precious information for everybody here. So I do hope you have like a whole bunch of subscribers after this this meeting. Right. So if no one else is for the question, if I'm allowed to use this catchphrase, then I suppose we're. Oh, Lucia. Okay, there you go.
Since you mentioned that you don't have much say in the cover, for the books, I suppose for the books, which one is your favorite for Graveyard Shift? There aren't many so far, but perhaps you have already a favorite one.
Yeah, let me roll over into the corner and show you which one is
because that would inspire us too.
And my desk chair is now. Sorry, my desk chair is getting caught on my office rug, you know. So this one is kind of, it's the same art, but this is the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition, and it's got this awesome like holographic rat on the front, which I am so excited about. I tried really hard to talk the publisher into making this glow in the dark, and they told me that we didn't have enough time. So tragically, it does not glow in the dark. However, we do have some very cool tour swag that does glow in the dark. And even if you can't come to tour, the artist who's making all this stuff for me has volunteered to make it stuff that you will be able to buy from her website. We don't have that set up yet, but if you want some graveyard swag and you can't make it to tour, that'll be an option at some point, and we'll post that on Instagram as soon as it's available. So yeah, but we did like this cover a lot. The designer had a real challenge because the poor guy had to actually design the cover before he'd read the book, because I wasn't finished writing it yet, because that's how short our timeline was. And I kept saying, no, it's too cute. It needs to be grosser. It needs to be grosser. It's too cute. And so we finally landed on this wonderful, like, decaying, dripping rat. And I was like, there you go. Now it's gross. That's what I wanted.
Thank you. That's good to know, because we're designing the book right now. So anything would help.
Yes. Go gross, go weird. Have a great time.
We can do that.
Yeah, that's perfect. +1 for any follow effect. I've been noticing that going on covers for a while now, and I'm totally in for it. So that looks really, really nice.
Yeah.
Good, guys. So as I was saying, if there isn't anything else, I would very, very much love to thank you, Mel, for having had the patience to bear with us tonight, or today in your case, as well. I don't know, maybe we'll make it the third time next year for FestivalYA, because you seem to be regular right now. I can see Mariuka nodding over there.
Please.
So it's really, really enjoyable to talk with you, and it doesn't seem to, you know, end. So we would like to have more of you. So maybe get prepared already. And I would like to ask you, maybe just for a nice touch at the end, if you had any sort of, you know, cheesy message for people who love your books in Romania. We would very much love to hear it.
Yeah, I'd love to come back next year, so count me in. And I'm delighted that you all still love this book so much and have so many questions. I think one of the greatest things that you can hear as an author is that your work is provoking conversation and provoking deep thinking. And especially for me as an academic, I love to hear the levels of analysis that you guys are bringing to this. So I'm just delighted to be here. I'm so glad that you've enjoyed the book. I hope that some of the chat about publishing has been useful and helpful. And if it has, definitely go to my Substack, because there's a lot of that there. I'm kind of like on a one-woman mission to demystify publishing, because I hate how obscure and obtuse it is. Yeah, and I'm just, you know, it's always so nice to see how many people still love books and want to keep them alive. So thank you all for being here and for asking such wonderful questions.
Thank you so much for everything that you gave us, and thank you everyone who decided to join us today live and also to follow us. Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Mariuka. And from my part, have a very nice evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.